When you go through an experience like losing a child, I often tell people that it's almost like supernatural things begin to happen around you because you're kind of living in this really odd state. The world is just moving on, but something so radically has shifted in your life, and a lot of unusual things seem to happen to people in that state. I've talked to a lot of families that have had experiences that are very surreal, and I had one of those experiences not long after my son's death. He died in August. And in October, I was in a ladies' Bible study, a Beth Moore Bible study. And on that particular night, Beth was on the screen and she told all of us in the room to close our eyes. We had been talking about the children of Israel when they finally crossed over the Jordan River into the Promised Land. We had talked for weeks about how long it took to make that decision, how much hesitation there was, how much fear there was about doing it. And then finally came the day where Joshua led the children through the Jordan River, led by the Ark of the Covenant. And she asked us in the middle of that study to just stop and close our eyes and picture ourselves standing there in the middle of the Jordan River for just a moment. And this is significant because we were at the point in the story where he had sent the priests back in to collect 12 rocks to be memorial rocks for that victory that God had in their life. And they were supposed to collect those rocks from the center of the Jordan River where they stood with the Ark of the Covenant as the children of Israel passed from one bank to the other and the water stood still on both sides of them. So she said, just close your eyes and picture yourself standing there in the middle where they were picking up those rocks. And she just said, feel it all. Feel the moist bed beneath your feet. Picture the water standing on edge on both sides of you, and look and see the bank behind you and see the bank in front of you. And she brought out in that story that when you're in the middle of a situation like that, and this is going to make me emotional to talk about it, when you're in the middle of a situation where you're going to the Promised Land, why is there always hesitation in our heart? She was asking us to contemplate why they stood there and waited for a few minutes. We have such a tendency as people to look back, to go back to what we know, even if it wasn't the best part of our lives or the best thing for us. We find a lot of comfort in what we know and understand. The hard thing for us to do in life, just as humans, it's so hard for us to go forward into the unknown. It is a very difficult thing to do, is to just walk forward. And so I did what she said, and I just closed my eyes. I wasn't in any particularly deep state of contemplation or anything. I was just following her instructions. So I closed my eyes, and I started trying to imagine my feet in that wet riverbed, and I tried to picture exactly what she said. And she said, now open your eyes. First, before you open your eyes, she said, first think about what's behind you. Think about the Promised Land in front of you. And contemplate whether your heart wants to run backwards to what you know or whether your heart wants to run forward to what might be waiting for you in the future. And of course, I was thinking, I want to go back. Because Aaron's back there. Because Aaron's back there. And everything in me wanted to just return to the way life was. And I understood for the first time the contemplation of moving into the unknown when you know what's behind you and what you would give to go back to good moments in your life, but God is calling you forward. And so I was sitting there thinking about that and becoming a little emotional about how much I did want to go back rather than forward at that point in my life. And then she said, open your eyes now, and just in your, while you still have your eyes closed, just in your mind, open your eyes and look toward the bank that's in the Promised Land and see it, and just take your first step toward it. And so in my mind, with my eyes closed on the outside, in my mind, I opened my eyes and I looked up to that bank. And instantly, it was just as if I was transported to another world. I've never had an experience like that in my life, and I've never had one since. And on that bank in the Promised Land was my boy, Aaron. And he was leaning forward, and he just had this huge grin on his face, like he did most of his life. And he reached his hand out to me. He said, come on, Mom, walk, just walk. And I just stood there and stared at him. And it was the most beautiful sight because it was the first time since he died that I had seen his face, and I was actually seeing his face. And it was the most surreal experience. And I just, for just a moment, I wasn't in a room with other women. I was standing there in the middle of the Jordan River looking up, and my son was on the other side, and he just kept saying it over and over again. And he kept like putting his foot down closer to the water, like he couldn't get in it. I had to get out of it. And he just kept saying over and over again, come on, Mom, just walk, just walk. Just take one step and walk. And so I started walking. And as soon as I started walking, the vision was over, and I was right back in the room with all the other women, and it was as if I'd just been startled from a sound sleep. It was so, what I had experienced was so real, but the peace that flooded my heart was absolutely overwhelming, because I had heard what he had said. I had been contemplating many things already. Just in the couple months that he'd been gone, I'd been contemplating many things that I felt like God was telling me to do, but they were all things that were part of talking about his life and his death, and it's not something that I wanted to do. But instantly, when I came out of that vision, I knew that I had to start walking. I knew that I had to start obeying where God was leading me, that I needed to start walking, and that I couldn't be stuck looking back, because the past was my past. And as much as it hurt to let it go, I had to move into the future God had for me. And so I started taking those steps. And the most miraculous thing about that whole thing was God had a gigantic plan for my life. I had no way of knowing that at the time, but he had a gigantic plan for my life. He had a plan for Aaron's death. He had a plan for Aaron's life, the way he lived it, which made the significance of his death so much greater, because it was a life so well lived, and it inspired me. And ever since that moment, in that Bible study, in that little room in Stuart, Florida, I've been walking. Just one step after another, walking forward, trusting that God's plan isn't finished with me yet. And when he's finished with me, he'll let me know. So fast forward to May of 2018, I had an opportunity to go to Israel. And we had been out, I don't know, several days touring different sites in Israel. And on the bus, I just happened to mention to Tom that I would sure like to go to the Jordan River, because I hadn't seen it on our itinerary. And so Tom said, of course. And he figured it was just because I'm a Christian and it's something I would like to see. But I began telling him the story of what happened that night in Bible study. And Tom actually got emotional as I was telling the story, and he said, look, we'll ask the man running this whole tour, the boss over this tour, we'll ask him if we can work in stopping at the Jordan River, while we're here in Israel. And I said, that would be amazing. It's really something I want to go touch and see firsthand, because it was such a profound moment in my life. And so we stopped at the very next stop, and unbelievably, as only God can do, Tom approached the man that would make the decision on where we would go to ask if we could stop at the Jordan River. And before he could even ask him, this man said, hey, I've made a change in our itinerary and we're going to stop at the Jordan River. That's just one of those things that only God can do. God intended me to see that spot. I'm not saying it was just for me, but I know it was a little gift to me. And so Tom came back and told me, he said, you're not going to believe this. We're going to the Jordan River. I didn't even have to ask. So I couldn't say that excited was the word for it. I was apprehensive, because I didn't know what kind of emotions I would experience standing there. So we get to the Jordan River, and of course it's very different than what you picture, because a lot of people are baptized there, and they have this whole ceremonial thing where people can go and be baptized in white robes, and it's a very public declaration of your faith, and it's beautiful and wonderful. But that's not the experience that I wanted, because my experience was so somber and so solemn, and I just wanted to find a place on the river that I could go and be alone and just have my minute to reflect with God and with Aaron on what we had experienced all those years ago together in that vision. And so We had to hunt around for a little while to find a place where we could actually go down to the river that wasn't one of these, wait your turn to be baptized, a place away from all the noise and the crowd. So we wander down off to the right of that area, and we find a place where we can actually take a little dirt trail right down to the edge of the river. And I can't even tell you how it took my breath when I got to that spot and looked across that river bank. It was the exact image that I had experienced 7 years earlier. It was exact. It was so overwhelming to look at it, because it was as though I could look across that riverbank and I could just see Aaron standing there. It was unreal. And so I asked my husband if he would get in the river with me. We had talked about this before and baptize me. I'd been baptized many, many years ago as a believer, but I wanted to be baptized there in the Jordan River, and I couldn't believe God had taken me to the very spot He had given me that vision of all those years earlier. And it was one of the most emotional, powerful, overwhelming experiences I've had in my entire life, and was sort of just another pinnacle in my walk with God, my walk in faith since Aaron's death especially. I'm so thankful that I took the time to go on that trip, that when you go to a land like Israel, when you go to a place with as much of our Christian history, with as much of our belief system there in the flesh, if you will, there's so much to be gained by putting your feet in those places. You never know exactly what God's going to do in your life when you step off that airplane and land on that soil in Tel Aviv. You have no idea what may be to come. So I just hope that every single one of you watching this take the opportunity to join us on this trip, because something extraordinary is going to happen. The man I was talking about earlier that was leading our tour, his name is Dr. Ronnie Wexler. He's an extraordinary man. He's a Jewish man. He's an Israeli. And as all Israelis do, he fought with the IDF. He fought in the 6-Day War and the Yom Kippur War. So I say that to say this: he understands the nature of war. He understands the heart of a war fighter. He understands the heart and passion of a warrior. We let him in on my story when we found out that we were going to visit the Jordan River that day. And so he followed us down and watched as I got into the river and as Billy baptized me. And Ronnie was so moved by that experience, apparently, that unbeknownst to me, Billy, he went to work and he started speaking to officials in the Israeli government, and something extraordinary happened. He got an approval on us going back to Israel in May of 2019 to plant an olive tree along the banks of the Jordan River in Aaron's honor, and in honor of the other 29 warfighters that Aaron died with on August 6, 2011. This is unheard of. They had stopped the planting of trees. They had stopped the planting of these memorial trees along the Jordan River a while back, but he got special authorization. And the reason that he did that is also because our son was a sold-out believer in Jesus, and often he would tell us that if America ever turned its back on Israel, he would go fight with the Israelis, because he understood God's plan for Israel, and he understood that they were the chosen people. And so all of this combined, Ronnie took to the authorities in Israel, and they all agreed to let us plant that tree in Aaron's honor. So in May of 2019, we're going back to Israel. And this time when we go to the Jordan River, we're going to be planting that tree along the banks in honor of our son and of the other 29 men who died in the shoot-down of Extortion 17. And I can tell you that we'll be joined by Israeli officials, we'll be joined by American officials, and this is something, as a proud American, you don't want to miss.